right?
So as you see just how technical it gets and you see how versatile trauma
Mhm.
is. So now this is the part where I'm wondering, you as a social worker, you probably have seen this. How difficult is it to diagnose it?
So you can't diagnose trauma per se. Like you don't. There's nothing like, oh, there's a diagnosis of trauma. Like you just like, oh, I experienced trauma, or I have experienced trauma. You within the trauma, within DSM, there's different things that you can diagnose within the trauma. So trauma with PTSD, trauma with dissociative personality, right? So trauma, I look at it as an umbrella term. So within that, there's other things that you can actually diagnose, like, right? So and also trauma itself is just a word that we put meaning to it. But what is happening within the trauma? Because you and I can have trauma, but we don't need to get any diagnosis, because like whatever, functional trauma, and but why do you need the label, and what is it serving you? That's also important to ask.
Yeah. That's the next question.
Yeah.
Is it important to have a label for it?
It depends on who you talk to. Some people like meaning, some people don't care for it. Some people with the label, sometimes you get more things out of it, like you can get more support. Some people, but it's also can be a stereotype, a stigma. So it really depends on your values, how you look at it. Do you own it? Do you give the power to somebody else? Like, would I have talked about in my anxiety disorder maybe 15 years ago? I would have, but not to this extent. I would have just
What you're
bypassed
saying?
it. Oh yeah, I have this, right? But now I'm more comfortable to talk about it in detail. Um, when I had my anxiety disorder in university, it was very important to get it labeled, because then I get more support in when I was
Yeah.
writing my papers, when I was doing my exams, right? At work, it's very important for me to have my not anxiety disorder, but my learning disability, because then I get accommodation, I get like things from my, right? So it just depends on what you want. I'm working with someone who says like, you know what, Kavita, I don't want my agency to know that I have a learning disability, because it's very frowned upon, because she's in a high position, right? It's not like you're smart, right? So it depends on a lot of stuff. So why do you need it? There's no right or wrong answer. What purpose does it serve you? Because there is a purpose when you do get labeled, but on the other side, sometimes it can also backfire on you. It
I
should.
was gonna add about that. It's
It
true.
should
I was
actually.
gonna say for sure I was gonna bring up because as I've mentioned on this podcast, I mentioned to you of where I work at a university, and
Yeah.
I've seen students, let's say for OSAP funding, um, if they have that disability on hand and they're labeled as such, they're able to get a lot more assistance.
100.
Now, think about that. These labels might be needed, but that's why a lot of times there is some lobbying, there is some what's the word I'm looking for? Protests and such. I'm trying to recall some recent ones, but
Mhm.
a lot of these labels that are labels now have been there through the communities or those who have suffered these debilitating effects, and they're the ones that want out there fighting for this because
Yeah.
maybe they cannot work full-time hours or maybe they cannot do this or that. They need some accommodation, and the only way to get legal on paper
Yeah.
accommodation is to have
Yeah.
that label.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
But
Unfortunately.
then you mentioned, and it's true, those stereotypes or the
That could
stigmas will
also,
come
right?
up.
So, but it's again, so I mean, for me, it doesn't matter. Like, my labels come out when I need to help myself. If this is going to help me move forward, I'm going to use it.
I mean,
But
that's
if
good,
it's
but not a lot
not,
of people think like that, which is
if
bad.
it's not, it's not. And so, and if I can, and part of my thing is like I do a lot of documentation. I need like a dictation program. It helps me with my learning disability. Why am I going to struggle? Like my whole thing is, if this technology, why am I suffering? Like I don't get it in my head,
I agree. I
right?
agree. Like, what's
But
the
it's
point?
not
We have
everyone.
resources, use them, you know?
Exactly. But but it is a process for me to come to terms with it. Like I think because of my work and because what I've gone through, it has been a journey, to be honest. It's not something like I didn't get up one day. I'm like, oh, I love being ahead. Like, there's nothing like that. It's just like I love these challenges because it makes me such a great person, right? Yeah. Right?
Oh man, yeah. I love how you brought up too. Like it must be difficult when you're in like higher positions, and then you mentioned if someone hears you have a learning disability. A lot of people Not a lot, but some people might not differentiate the fact that a learning disability does not mean at all of any
Nothing.
impact about your
No,
IQ or your DOM or whatever.
nothing.
Come on, that is not the
No.
case. It is
Learning
that they need to learn in a different way. There's a lot of different ways to receive information. That's just
disability
one of
people
them.
actually are smarter than an average Joe. However, it's just that we think differently, right? Like we think differently. We think, but the problem is if you're in a mathematics, like I think you were saying that some people think people who have learning disabilities, like some are dumber or not as smart, but averagely we actually excel in certain part of the thing. It's just that our brain works differently, right? We see things, right? We learn differently, and unfortunately I think now a lot of people are understanding how a lot of people with learning disability think, but it's not always the case, right? But there's a stigma. So if I say that I have a learning disability on my interview, I even till this day I'm like, I don't say that, because I'm like, you don't know me, you're going to judge me, right? I won't
I
say it.
know.
I only say
Yeah.
it once I get the job and I need it, right?
It's over, Kavita. We're judging you, right, guys? It's
I
over.
know.
We
That's
judged
like
her.
you gotta
We
get
judged her.
comments. Like,
I mean, how dare? I'm sorry, you're dumb now. No, but I understand.
but
I know what you mean, and it's true. It's not
you
nice, you
have to be
know.
careful, right? Like I do think you should be careful on who you share this information with, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
and that sucks. But hopefully, that's going to be something that, because we're like, as you mentioned, we're starting to realize there are so many more ways to intake information.
Yeah.
It's not, you can't, like, disabilities, be it physical or mental, they are just different ways of experiencing the same life that we all have.
Yeah.
And we're finally getting to a point where we're realizing this. So those who do have learning plans or things like that, they may be probably are going to be so much better than you at something that you never would have thought. So,
Yeah.
that's always something I find interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah.
So that was the importance about labels. So
Yeah.
as you see, they could be both very good or very bad. It does bring a lot of support to a lot of people, but at the same time, we just talked about how badly it can be used against you. But for the last question of this podcast, we did talk about how.
If you want to hear more stories, don't forget to subscribe, comment, and like. To support more youth by youth led projects, visit us at youthspeak.ca, where you can donate and spread youth mental health awareness.
YouthSpeak Performance Charity. Speak, inspire, change.